So thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm really delighted to welcome our wonderful guests. And the reason why we're hosting this is because, as an artist, Michelle, it's PAULINA project is a project that has really developed since 2016, I think. And the seeds were thrown, and at the beginning you really didn't know that you would be, where it would lead to, and that it would kind of continue over the years. So you'll also be providing interesting tips to artists who might be developing long-term projects. And Bartek was the one who initiated this talk. So, and Bartek and Residency Unlimited have a very long-standing relationship as well. And so I think a lot of you already know Michelle and Bartek, so I won't dwell on your impressive bios. But one of the reasons why Michelle also, I think, has been so successful in her development of the PAULINA's project is also because you were running the EFA program for many years, so you had this administrative kind of brain, which combined with your creative brain is, doing wonders. And Bartek also has combining, as former deputy director of the Polish Cultural Institute. Thank you to the Polish Cultural Institute for supporting this program tonight. Also as a curator, you curated the first solo show of the Tamara de l'Empika show here in the US. So I will be just here, listening to what you're saying and maybe asking a few questions, but we really encourage you to ask and to participate in this conversation. And I think Michelle is going to be doing kind of a performative
a mix.
It's a mix. So I'm very curious about it, and thank you so much. So shall I sit down or shall I?
We're going in the public, but I tell you why we wanted to have this program, because Michelle's project is a very positive reinforcement for other artists in New York that can see that a project first can evolve, that you can get partners on it along the way, and you can make it, even if it's getting like small at the beginning. Now it turns to a bigger project with all the dedication work that Michelle gave it to it. And there's a lot of frustration within artistic community in New York that things are not possible, there is no funding, everything is difficult. And Michelle and her project is a great case study, how you can not get frustrated, how can you work on it, and how you can hope basically to achieve not always what you wanted to achieve, because projects, they evolve. And Michelle's project evolved greatly. And I was really happy to be at the very beginning of the project, because we've met in 2016, I believe, and we talked, and I've learned about what she had in mind. She went to Poland for a study trip or residency with Rebecca Gruber, from here to New York to Polin Museum, which is Museum of Polish Jews, and the project kind of was building since then. And I think that the most important thing for artists, for curators, is to talk. And when you meet people, just talk, not with interest, but like inform people what you're doing, because you never know who can help you. And it was like a very chance meeting.
Bartek helped me.
And I could help. I was in the position to help by chance. Yeah. And I'm so proud to see the project now, how it developed, and I've met a person that she worked with, Patrycja Dołowy, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't know Patrycja before, and it's through your project that I've met a great person from Poland, my country, that I didn't know. So it's very beneficial, and you'll see how interesting it is. So the questions are welcome.
Hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathalie and Bartek. So, this is a little bit of a hodgepodge and hopefully it will make sense, and whatever doesn't, we can try to piece it together. So, as a storyteller, I'm interested in the moments where performance and life intersect, and in the space between truth and fiction where our identities are constructed. My works begin with a personal prompt that's tied to a larger collective story. They're explorations in process, presented in a state of continual becoming. One story often bleeds into another. And as each unfolds, I invite audiences to connect with and become a part of my journey with me, sometimes over years. Paulina is a project that now appears to be never-ending. It officially began in 2017, but since it comes from an earlier story, it's been longer. It's an expanding work prompted by the discovery of a text, the survival testimony of a Polish woman named Paulina Hirsch, whose life, long after her death, became intertwined with mine. This project has been both a solo work and a collaboration, unfolding primarily through various modes of performance. Performative research, exploring dynamic approaches to sharing research with audiences. Performative actions based on embodied experience, often through travel and place-based exploration. And here I am with my Polish collaborator, Patrycja Dołowy. Engagement with local communities, and how this helps to drive the story forward. And more formal performance in the form of an evolving multimedia storytelling performance, presented across Poland, in the US, and streaming, as I, both with my collaborator Patrycja and on my own, tried to make sense of the unbelievable thing that happened in Poland while we were following Paulina's story. And the final performance, unfolding now in the present, takes place on the screen as a hybrid nonfiction film being made right now. It includes the aftermath, how the impact of Paulina's story continues to shape my life. So I've started with the overall scope of the project before telling you the actual story and how it came into being, so I'm going to go back. In February of 2017, on a visit to Warsaw, my artistic path and my life experienced a detour. This Instagram post marks the moment. It says, her name was Paulina, daughter of my great-grandmother's brother. This is her written account of surviving the Holocaust in Krakow. I didn't know of her until today. At that time, I was in the middle of an unfolding performance piece, delving into my grandmother's unknown past in Eastern Europe. My Jewish grandmother on my mother's side, who died of dementia and whose memory and belongings, especially her clothes, I, her only granddaughter, became the caretaker of. Wearing and living with my grandmother's things, I was haunted by the holes in her past, until a surprise discovery of a 100-year-old school report card amongst some papers in my mother's home shook things up. How had we not seen this before? It contained my grandmother's previously unknown birthplace in a town that is now in southern Poland. And it contained the signature, like a ghost, the only physical trace of my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, whose young death broke her. And that pain I grew up knowing, but until this moment, I had no name for its source. The name, Salomea Hirsch. This performance/unfolding genealogical mystery, ignited by all the hope and imagination and speculation that the signature brought forth, led me to Poland. As a participant in a retreat for Jewish artists interested in Polish Jewish history, hosted by Asylum Arts and Poland Museum, thanks to Bartek for recommending me. And while I was there, I visited this building, the Jewish Historical Institute, the headquarters for Jewish genealogical research of Central and Eastern Europe, to try to find any information I can on my great-grandmother, Salome Hirsch. The genealogist I met with could find nothing on Salome Hirsch, except that she had a brother. Often it's, in that time period, it's the male records that are saved. And he had a daughter, Paulina, from Krakow. Around the same age as my grandmother, Paulina had lived through World War II and given a testimony of her experience in 1945. It was one of thousands of testimonies collected of survivors at the end of the war. This testimony was on file right there where I was. So back to this image spread across my magenta hotel bedspread. Magenta's kind of become Paulina's color. I didn't know Paulina existed until an hour ago. This was a mysterious, haunting, and ungraspable object to me. It was written in Polish. This is where Patrycja comes in. We had met on the artist retreat and both connected over the work we were doing about our grandmothers. She's a writer and artist and a member of the very small Jewish community remaining in Poland, a few thousand where there were once 3 million. She does very sensitive and powerful memory work and sees herself as a midwife to the buried stories of Polish Jewish past. So we met in a cafe, and Patrycja strained to translate a text that was written by a secretary in an obscure Polish shorthand. She had seen such testimonies before, testimonies from her own family, but this one was especially hard to decipher. Both the typewritten version and the handwritten version, it took hours to get the story out, and it would take years and many other eyes looking at this text to really get an accurate understanding. But even in its earliest reading, it was electrifying. We were both bewildered by this woman, our age, early 40s, surviving in plain sight, with many twists of fate, escaping harm again and again, moving boldly across great distances, often on her own. And there's so much detail in this text, many facts, names of people she encountered, places, events, but little about her personally. Beyond this testimony, I could find no other single record of this woman's life after the war. An introductory blurb stated that she had entered the war with a husband and daughter, but at the time of the testimony, she was alone. I became possessed, maybe because Paulina was my age in the story, and because she was on her own, like me, and because we were again witnessing a dangerous political shift in the world, or because she lost her daughter at the same age I was trying to accept that I had never had one. What I know is I couldn't rest from the moment I laid eyes on this text. I feverishly put together a performance presented at Nurture Art called She Is Alone, that bridged the story of my grandmother and my great-grandmother with the discovery of Paulina. Some of the people present tonight were there. I invited the audience to read the rough English translation out loud in rotation under the projection of its original Polish text. I could see the story holds a lot of meaning for a New York audience, but this was only scratching the surface. 1 month later, I traveled to Poland with my mother. This is not my mother. My mother is right there. We went to my grandmother's birthplace, as recently discovered on the 100-year-old report card. So while we were in southern Poland, I gave a small presentation of She Is Alone with an organization called Festiwald in Krakow, Paulina's home city. And the layers of complexity asking Polish women from Krakow to struggle out loud with this testimony translated roughly into English, the layers of filtering and translation to get to the source of what was true and what was real, made me certain of my next step. I had to investigate this story in depth in the places where it happened with the people who live there now. This would mean a big life change for me. And so here I am with my Polish visa. By the fall of 2018, I stepped away from my job of 10 years as the founding director of EFA Project Space and moved to Poland for 9 months. Over this course of time, I would turn the age Paulina was at the end of the war, and this was intentional. How did I do this? You may see the hashtag says, it's all the way down there, Levy-Bright. I had originally planned this as a Fulbright project. The day after I found out I was a semi-finalist, Poland passed the Holocaust bill, making it a criminal act to make any public claims about Poland's complicity with Nazi crimes. Suddenly, there was an increase in fear, and support for Holocaust-related projects in Poland appeared to start being cut. I do want to add that the severity of this was only for a period of time, and then it was walked back, and Bartek could probably speak more accurately about this than I can, certainly. But in this moment, I was skeptical that I would get support for a project that included public interaction, just kind of unpredictable around a Holocaust narrative. So I made a backup plan, and this saved me, because had I waited until I found out about the Fulbright, I never would have been able to do this project. Who knows why I didn't really get it, but sometimes we need the right story to keep the fire going. So I had it all set up. My hosts and partners remained committed to the project. I had my travel visa in place. Instead of Fulbright, I had my Levy-Bright. My research and public engagement was hosted by the Polin Museum, the Jewish Museum in Warsaw, plus the Jewish Historical Institute, where I found Paulina's testimony, and Patrycja would work together with me on the major action my research was building toward, a performative journey retracing Paulina's wartime path across present-day Poland and Ukraine. And in the weeks before I left, I did a fundraiser. The focus of my missive to my community was twofold: the personal story, taking the leap of faith, an artist stepping away from home and security to follow a dream, and the universal importance, the story of an underrepresented voice in a political moment when nationalism is rewriting narratives. I raised enough money for my living expenses and would be able to secure more grants and resources for the project production once I got there. So now, after a year and a half, I have arrived in Poland. This building was Paulina's address in Krakow before the war, as noted on her testimony. One of the mysteries of Paulina's testimony was the absence of her daughter's name. I assume because her daughter's death was too recent and too painful to name. But now that I had help finding records of this building, I learned her daughter's name. Irena, born 1922, died 1944. Her birth record led to another discovery, that Paulina and Irena were not my family. Paulina Hirsch had the same name, age, and was from the same place as my relative, Paulina Hirsch, but they were two different people. For this Paulina Hirsch, Hirsch was her married name. It was right there in front of my eyes all along. That's Hirsch, the last name of her husband. Somehow nobody had caught it. So while this was a shock, and there turned out to be a lot more complicated feelings around it that I didn't expect, the simple and obvious answer was, I'm an artist. I love twists. This was interesting. And really, she could have been my relative. And now that I knew who Paulina was, I could find out more about her. Like the fact that after the war, she had worked for the organization that was collecting testimonies, which had become the very institution where I had found hers, and where I was currently researching her. Instagramming was part of my performative research. This was one of the early posts I did before I knew much about anything but this house where Paulina was sheltered for a while by journalists involved in the underground resistance was in the neighborhood I lived in. There were so many details, so many rabbit holes to go down, information gathered, and more of these discoveries that made me feel almost like Paulina or someone was playing a game with me. I spent months of research in archives, meeting with specialists, conducting workshops with the story, sharing my research and process, reading, watching, learning Polish, communing with Paulina's ghost, exploring, not really, but kind of, exploring, feeling lonely and outside of things, but also a strange sense of belonging and familiarity. And by April of 2019, I'm ready to go on the journey retracing Paulina's wartime path with Patrycja, my Polish counterpart. The arrangements were made. Our itinerary was made public for people to follow, and we had numerous institutions that would promote and host events with us along the way. We had these 1940s jumpsuits made as our uniform to remind us, and those we encountered, that we are not normal civilians, but agents on a mission between the past and the present. Our goal to follow Paulina's path from place to place, bringing her story to life in the present, using her testimony as our score. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the geography to give you a sense of where she went. So this is Poland now. And this was Poland in 1939, which is adjusting the brightness settings so you can see this a little bit more clearly. I'm just going to run through this very quickly. Otherwise, I get lost in the whole story narrative. But the Germans occupied the west, the Soviets occupied the east. Paulina started where that red pin is, in a place called Siedlce. We don't know why she was there. She went east and south to what was then Lviv, now Lviv in Ukraine, where she lived for a few years until the Germans invaded. And now I'm just going to show you her route and not give all the details because there's a lot of details. So we'll just follow the little lines. Wieliczka, Krakow, Lviv, Warsaw, all around Warsaw, and then up north towards the sea, and then back, all the way back down to Krakow at the end of the war. So this was our trajectory. The story of what happened on my journey with Patrycja, following Paulina's testimony, is also the story of a growing relationship between the two of us. We're flip sides of a coin, the one whose family left, the other whose family stayed, coming from our own subjective relationship to what is really our shared history. We traveled many places by car that Paulina would have by foot. She would have been smuggled across this river in the dead of night. And it was very much an adventure, sometimes to territory unfamiliar to both of us. This is the entrance to Ukraine. And this is what a lot of the part of Ukraine we were going through looked like. And we passed through the region of my own family. This is the borscht in my great-grandparents' village. It was very good. While everything we experienced once we had set out on the road felt important and wondrous, nothing could possibly prepare us for what would come next. Throughout this whole time, I really felt Paulina was with us, or Paulina's uncanny luck was helping us somehow. But no more blatantly than when we arrived at our next destination, the old mining town of Wieliczka, where Paulina lived briefly in 1942. This was the last place she lived with her husband. He was arrested here and taken to Gestapo prison. And when Paulina couldn't get permission to go and try and help him, she left anyway without her papers. She wasn't able to save him. The state archives in Krakow housed files from the prison where Paulina's husband was held. The only information I can access was a series of package recipient lists on which his name appeared. On one of these, there was a sender with an address in Wieliczka, Krakowska Street. The sender's name, Janina Gryzela. I know this is a lot of information, but it will come around. So during a presentation we gave at the local library, hosted by the mayor, a woman who had walked in, hosted by the mayor because there's a New York artist passing through, a woman who had walked in accidentally intended to go to a film screening next door, overheard one of us mention the name Gryzela, a name she knew, and decided to stay. She knew the man who lived in what was the Gryzela's house because he was her neighbor. This is Stefan, an entomologist who apparently lived in the house that once sheltered Paulina. He didn't know, and we didn't know that, until he told us, knowing that we are Jewish and interested in his house, the story of once finding old documents inside a cocoa tin at the bottom of his well decades ago. He remembered to this day that they belonged to someone with a short name, like Kirsch or Hirsch. He saved them, hoping to one day find their owner. Okay, so at this point, it's not a secret, out in the world, what Stefan found, and I can tell you, and I probably will, but this is just where everything stopped and kind of turned on its head. And it was less than a week into our journey. It's this moment that the performance that I was doing with Patricia was, and the film I'm working on now is, continually building toward. The moment where the truth cuts through everything to the core. I'm staying on this image of Stefan, which was actually taken on a return visit that fall, because within 1 year of meeting him, he died. We were so moved by this man, the local caretaker of Jewish memory, that Patrycja and I vowed to help in his effort to save an archive of Jewish documents he believed was still buried in his town. This became an important subplot to my work with Patrycja. And in this moment of truth that cut through everything, thanks to the contents contained inside this gray envelope, these contents being, there's never any way to just say it, but these contents being Paulina's Polish ID from 1939, the photograph removed, but it was hers, and her daughter Irena's Jewish wedding contract created within a year or two of her death. So I also made a personal vow in the name of the child Paulina lost, a vow that is intimately explored in the film. But first, what happened after the journey with Patrycja? We worked together to process our experience in the weeks that followed, and a little bit more about the support while I was there. This had become a project in residence with Festivalt that had hosted that very early presentation of the She is Alone performance. They're an alternative Jewish festival in Krakow. And they co-hosted a premiere of our performance in process at the Galicia Jewish Museum, along with an exploratory walk of Paulina's Krakow. And this was followed by a version presented in Warsaw at PAULINA. You've seen images of this earlier. And in addition to Festivalt, the Galicia Museum and Poland Museum, these presentations were made possible by a grant from the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw and remaining funds from Asylum Arts, which supported our journey. Embassy funds also enabled me to return to Wieliczka that fall and perform with Patrycja to the local community there, including Stefan. So that was very special. Back in New York, thanks to Polish curator Monika Fabianska in early 2020, I presented this story at La Mama Galleria, showing this again, and this led to an invitation for a performance residency with Baruch Performing Arts Center to further develop and premiere the performance with Patrycja in New York the following year. While this was indefinitely postponed, the premiere, due to COVID, it led to other things. Like working with a director, Kathleen Amshoff, to create this hybrid live streaming performance as a first step, thanks to an invitation to participate in a festival with Kana Theater in Szczecin that I had been in conversation with since the beginning of this project. And this streaming performance during the pandemic showed me the potential of a broader reach, and with a lot of time to be reimagining this project, I started moving towards film. In the beginning, Patrycja and I were planning to make the film about our story together. But over time and distance and all that has been going on in the world, that became impossible for Patrycja. She had meanwhile written a book, Scarby, Treasures. There's more subtitle, but centered around our story together and branching out into other stories. In it, she included my own story, which was translated into Polish and woven throughout, and it's been published and released in Poland. So after our time of telling our story together, I'm now part of her book, and she will be a part of my film. Regarding my transition to film, I owe a lot to the organization Union Docs, where I took a number of amazing workshops and participated in an intensive 5-week lab, and through which I have found many important mentors, collaborators, advisors. And also NIFA, my fiscal sponsor, from the time this was going to be a performance in New York, was extremely helpful in my transition from performance to film, providing me with ongoing advice and moral support, and helping me secure my first film grant with NISCA, which enabled me to start making the film. So I'm just going to show you this short little piece from an extended teaser I created last year to represent where the film was at that moment. You know, this is just an ever-changing project, but because of the sensitive nature of the unfolding part of the story, or the unfolding part of me, today I removed the intro and the last part, so hopefully it still holds together. This is just really to give you a taste. Oh, and then went away. Sorry. I don't know what I just, here we go.
This story began when my grandmother lost her memory. As her only granddaughter with no children of my own, I was driven to find what she lost. Instead, I found the story of another woman, and it changed everything. Picture a stage where time is flattened to witness a constellation of everything, everyone from the story, appearing all at once. There's Paulina, the catalyst. I don't know what she looked like, the color of her hair or her eyes, the shape of her face. What I have is a text stating she was a mother who lost her daughter, a wife who lost her husband, while she lived through the Holocaust. By 1945, she was 43 and alone. There's Paulina's testimony, the document itself, 10 fading pages written in Polish shorthand, describing a woman hiding in plain sight throughout Nazi-occupied Poland. But who is the woman behind this text? And what happened to her daughter, who remains unnamed? Then there's me, Michelle. While searching for information on my grandmothers in Poland, I'm handed this testimony of my cousin, previously unknown. I'm the same age she was during the war. This moment where our timelines intersect is my invitation to leave my life behind to find her. In comes Patrycja, a Polish Jewish writer who translates Paulina's text for me, becoming a part of it. She joins me as partner detective on an epic journey across Poland and Ukraine, following Paulina's wartime path to see what we will find.
I feel like we are kind of Jewish families. What will be on our way? That's the question.
While on the road, the luck of error leads us to Stefan, a Polish caretaker of Jewish memory who found, decades ago, in the well of his yard, an old cocoa tin containing the impossible.
This is Paulina. Her birthday.
Paulina's ID card, the photograph removed, and with it, her daughter, Irena, her sacred wedding vows, containing promises for a future life and children that we now know will never come. How is it possible to reach back through time and be touched by the grief of someone I have never met? For a moment, I am Paulina. I am a mother who lost her daughter. I can no longer accept that my time to have a child has passed.
Passed. Got cut off. So yeah, that ending got a little cut off, but. So yeah, that is not the film, but it conveys a sense of the story and a sense of the visuals that I'm working with. This is a still from my view in Warsaw on my recent trip back after 4 years to reconnect with this story. And this was a moment of regrouping as the world and my life has continued to change, and I forge ahead with creating this film in response to those things. I got to return with Patrycja to Wieliczka for our still unfinished story and to do a shoot doing some DIY scoping of the buried archive site. The buried archive and this story of my future child are very much in conversation with each other. And this is from a recent visit to Paulina's grave, which is actually in Pennsylvania. She was remarried after the war and lived the rest of her life and died in Philadelphia in 1991. And she had no other children, and I have yet to find a photo of her or anyone who knew her here in this country. Maybe someone watching this streaming will come find me. And then, of course, there's the story of the other Paulina, which sometimes people want to know about, the one who was actually related to me. I'm not going to tell you about that now. But I did find out some things about her. She also came to the US. So that kind of concludes the project. Leaves us where I am now to some extent. I just threw in these credits because I would have put them in with the slides. There are so many people to credit. These are people who documented the images and the slides and the directors of 2 of the performances. But there are many, many, many credits, people, partners, presenters, funders, collaborators that this project is indebted to. So I just threw this slide in that says community as a reminder to myself of the importance of the community, of outreach, of making intimate connections. As Bartek said, so much of this project just came out of conversations. And also my, yes, like my administrative skills, applying how I've developed and supported other artist projects in my years as a curator and arts administrator to this project. This is a hard to place kind of project. People have to kind of see it to understand it. I've applied to many things I haven't gotten. All of the big things. I haven't gotten any of the big things, but have found ways to continue to get support, often in-kind support with each step, each new chapter. I figured I've altogether raised about $30,000 for the project, performance and film, which isn't nearly enough considering the film part, but it's not anything to sneeze at. And at this point, I've spent all of my film funds, about $18,000 I raised so far, and I'm moving ahead on my own until something changes. But in a moment like this, I feel especially lucky because I have built so much community around this project, and I have filmmakers and artists I can turn to for feedback. And, you know, that as hard as it can be to stick with something this long, I'm keeping it going. So, ta-da!
So can you give us a small kind of sneak preview in the next chapter? Or is it, which might have been evoked here, but
So, yeah, the
life in the US, perhaps? Or
no, the next chapter is, I mean, the film is telling the story as a film and revisiting it, and also it's my chapter of trying to have a child. And also trying to save this archive, which we're probably not going to save, but it feels very, yeah. I'm not going to, yeah. Essentially, like, what's happened, the film has continued to change. Like, it was originally a film about trying to save this buried archive with Patrycja. And then as we worked towards that and found that it was really, really complicated to do that, and likely the likelihood of, for bureaucratic reasons, for just ground chemistry reasons, like the likelihood of finding something was very small, then the story went towards, you know, the original story of, you know, looking for Paulina and actually finding her. And when Patrycja was no longer co-creating it with me, the question was, how can I tell this story as my story, not our story? And for me, the story has always been centered around this question of motherhood. And I definitely connected with Paulina's loss. And so that's something that I've, you know, I'm not going to like get into the details because it keeps, you know, I'm living my life, and it's, you know, some of it is, some of it at times I'm very exposing and sharing everything, and other times I'm like this isn't a moment where I'm ready to just share everything. But yeah, so it's about exploring that. And it's, I've come to realize, like, in this process of making a film, like, I was trying to really fit the film into this way that, like, it would get a certain kind of support from, like, filmmaking grants. And this is really such a, you know, experimental and personal project that doesn't really fit into those formats. So So it's kind of a journey, even just figuring out what the film is and how it's my present story and how it's this what happened in the past. And you know, sometimes it's much more about the past and sometimes it's much more about what's happening now, and I'm just in it. Yes?
I have a question. You said Paulina had a daughter, and then the daughter was married? So have you found any information on who she married? Did she have any children?
Yeah, I did. The one of the items that we found, you know, that Stefan had discovered that had been buried was her daughter's wedding contract.
Right.
So I had known from the testimony that she had been married because it mentioned a son-in-law and then that they were both taken away. And I knew that her daughter had died. So, you know, by the time we saw that wedding contract, it was pretty certain that they both had died. We did follow up and try to, you know, find out more about her husband, but he definitely was killed too. So I mean, if they had children, it would have been like a baby, you know, and...
Or his family?
She was 22.
She was 22, yeah. So, yeah, no. Yeah.
Did you find out that she had moved to Philadelphia and lived in Philadelphia?
Well, once I knew that she wasn't my relative and I knew her real, like, last name and could research her further, that she was living in Krakow under her maiden name for a while, so I found records that way and somehow found this second husband and then traced her with that last name, Paulina Klinger.
Some question related to the archive you're searching for it, like will you do some research on it and then you modify them like into your art piece, so your piece will be more like a documentary or it's more like half based on historical fact and half based on like your interpretation of like Paulina's story?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's more like the second. It's not. Nothing is actually fiction, but like it's bringing in my creative take on things. So it's not a straightforward documentary. There's a lot of my work before this film has mostly taken place as a kind of performance lecture that brings in like free association and speculation and like dreams, but you know, to me that's all part of our processing what we're experiencing and what we're seeing and making, like, understanding what things mean actually, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And it seems as though this whole research phase, which took many years, is kind of over. Now you're moving into something else.
Reflection of a kind, maybe. Living and reflection.
With all of this archival, but the archival material is no longer, it's not that it's not relevant, but you're moving into something completely different, which has to do with yourself.
Living archive.
Right. So that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And how you're going to manage that, and you don't know yet, because this is what I find very interesting as well. Very exciting.
Thank you.
And Michelle, could you tell us more about fundraising? Because now we're thinking about the feature movie, which we're working on it. So you create projects, gaining money. It's not like, I'm saying that because a lot of artists, especially in Europe, think that artists only work on art and have money, you have to earn it, you invest in it, but now you really need substantial amount of
Yeah.
to produce a feature film. So how it goes, how it works.
Yeah, I mean, that keeps changing. I'm learning a lot about it myself too, as this is my first time. And when I started getting into it, I heard from a lot of filmmakers, you really have to make, if you're making like an arty film, arty documentary film, especially like a personal one, you have to make the majority of it before you get the support. And I was like, no, I'm gonna get the support. But what I've come to see is that's really true, but that means raising money in chunks. Like I have, basically raising money to make bits of it at a time, and I'm fortunate that I can edit. That I've been editing video. I've been making video art and editing video for a long time. It's different editing a film for sure, but like it helps me to be able to keep working on it at the times when I don't have the support. And I just have kind of benchmarks for myself of like when the next time I'm gonna do a push, what I want to get done, like what I want to accomplish on my own with editing scenes together to do another push when I can really show what this film will be. But I honestly don't have an answer about how to raise the full amount of the, what is needed for a feature film. What I've come to really hear and comprehend and feel okay about from like the filmmaking colleagues that I now have is that the funding circuit is funding a very specific kind of films, and if you want to make something that's not that kind of a film, it's best to not spend all of your time making fundraising material, because I really spent, I don't know, I think maybe even a year working on the teaser, working on all of these grant materials and not working on the film. And so the idea is finding whatever way that you can to be making it on your own, and only once you have something, I think, to show, to then do another push. This is specifically with this kind of film, a personal, experimental, complex film that will probably be a hybrid mix of archival and essay, and it's not a mainstream kind of film. So yeah, it's just staying determined, and I'm saying this as if I do this and it's very, very hard. And I it's a huge job. And I can do it because I keep getting that reassurance from other filmmakers, like this is actually what you're supposed to be doing. And if it might end up being a very low budget film in the end, not the budget that I had originally planned, and not everything shot beautifully. It's impossible for me to know in the end what it will be, but now I know that I'm actually making it and not waiting for the huge funds to come in.
And I'm asking this question because it's insider's knowledge, but Michelle is also a grant writer that you can hire services of.
Thank you for the plug.
Also to work with, so we need this kind of people like yourself and others.
Yeah.
To develop applications and.
Yeah. It is true. I am a very well adept writer, especially at grant writing, and I do help a lot of other artists. Sometimes it's easier to help, to do things really effectively for other people than for yourself. Not that I think I've been ineffective for myself, but because this is a personal project and a very complicated project, and I'm very much in the weeds. I actually, for the last grant I did, hired somebody to help me because you really need another person, another perspective, yeah.
Because like this is what I see in my work, that artists often too deep into their project and they don't see like a bigger picture, and you need someone from the outside to pinpoint some problems and maybe some directions
always.
that you can take. So yeah, that's what good luck with fundraising.
Yeah, no, it's been very liberating that I decided that I'm taking a break from that being my prime focus and just like giving myself time to work, because actually I think it will help the fundraising in the end.
Michelle, are you interested in doing the lecture performance of this project? Because I think they're really good, and I think they're like even if the film is not yet.
Well, actually, that's a very good question, Karen, and thank you. I realized in this process so basically, since I started working on the film, I always felt like I'm not a filmmaker. I need help from all these filmmakers. And so I have all these different people who've been helping me in different capacities, to the extent that like I wasn't really trusting myself, just like trusting them to tell me what is like a good film. And I realized that for me to be making this with my own voice, really in the tone that it needs to be, I have to make it in the way that I make work. And so I actually really would like to be developing it live. Like, so have a version, you know, that is kind of in between, you know, that's like performance lecture and the film. That's what I'm picturing, because that's actually how I really write, you know, if I'm imagining like a delivery. Maybe in the end it will end up just being back to being a performance.
Not in the end, but even now, because I've seen the one in Burma before the pandemic, and now in each lecture of yours is kind of a performance lecture, and it's a medium by itself, and you're doing it really good, and I think it's part of this project. And you didn't show the two parts of the film, but I think it's there are a lot of elements already in the project to be a work already, without the film.
Yeah, I think for a period of time I was so focused on I'm making a film and I have to put all my energy towards it, but I do feel really differently now because I do like doing the performance lecture. Yeah. Yeah.
A way to raise money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. What did you find out about the real history of the Hirsch?
I found out that she also immigrated. She immigrated during the war because her family, she had ended up in Belgium, and maybe it was easier, I don't know. But it must have been easier to leave from there. So she left in 1942, came to Ellis Island, lived in Manhattan for a long time, and ended up, I think, in Atlantic City in the end. I've tried to trace her grandchildren, but I haven't been able to find anybody yet, but it's still possible. It's crazy that we had this family living here in New York. And I talk about this with my mom, you know, that my grandmother didn't know her cousin was here because there was this kind of rift in our family. So it's another story. And I think part of this story is the fact that there are so many of these stories, and like that I never found the story of my great-grandmother who I was looking for. You know, I found this woman instead, and this kind of became the family that I was looking for, because that's the story that I found. But it also shows us how many of these stories are still, you know, unfound. Yes?
The last performance you opened it with this, the therapy, the generational therapy.
Yes.
Is that going to be worked into?
I hope so. I need a budget for that. I keep thinking, oh, I'm going to find a way to do it, but because that. Yes, we're talking about this thing called family constellation therapy, and this was a way of me thinking of how to do reenactment that's also something new. It's a form of trauma-based therapy where there's a circle of participants and there's a facilitator and there's a person who's trying to work out something with a block. And each participant is assigned like a role that's from this person's family constellation. And then they are asked questions and they interact with each other. And I'm not describing it exactly well, but I'm trying to do it quickly. And I wanted to do a constellation like this around this story that happened. The sort of the thing about it is that you can't control who's brought into the circle and what individuals what characters are brought in. So it was kind of exciting. It would be like this new way of thinking about the story and seeing what happened and seeing what we could learn, because it's like this kind of energy work, this idea that like we're all drawn to a story because of our own trauma, and like drawn to play a certain role because of something we're trying to work out in our own life. And this, I'm sort of like rambling, but I had learned about this when I was in Poland, and I really felt like almost like the experience of traveling, coming together with Patrycja and how we met Stefan. It was really kind of like this living version of a constellation like that. Like we were all drawn together through things we were trying to like work out in our own lives. So I just thought this was a beautiful thing, and it could be really interesting to just try it out with a group of people and see what happens. But I would love to document it the right way, because you can only do it once. And then if things change, you know, if you follow the belief of it, like the energy shifts. So I originally thought this would be a main part of the film, actually, and it still could be, but because there's no way to know what will happen, it has to just be a scene that might be a bigger part of the film, but it's a very expensive scene, so not for while I am making the film without more support.
And Michelle, because we're talking budgets, I'm really interested, like how much money we're talking about when you're developing a film? What's like the ideal budget and what's the minimum budget that you can work with? I mean, what's the...
I think it ranges so much with what kind of film you want to make. But for an independent experimental documentary, I was told a low budget is something like $350,000. That's a low budget. Yeah. So it's like it's another realm completely than the art realm.
Yeah, but there are also a lot of artists films made with zero budget.
I know. But that's what I'm saying. That I'm just saying what in the yes.
Accommodating all this huge production that we see and we get used to it. It's also changed the perspective, the way to see video art or film made by artists, like we should not.
Yes.
There are ways.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not make those
But this is-
it's like cinema.
Yeah, this is why I've had to shift. Like at first I was like, I'm making a film and I had this idea of what it was going to be, and now I'm going back to that kind of openness that it doesn't have to be in that way.
Until now, you told us that it's like $20,000 that you fundraise.
For the film, yeah.
But like for the project, like
The project overall, I mean, it's over just like over 30,000, I think. Like the film was like 18, and the performance research stuff was like 12. But I think maybe a little bit more than that, like maybe like 32,000. Which like stretching over time isn't, it sounds like a nice amount, but it's not really. It's enough for one person to like keep working hard on their own without a lot of extra help. Yeah.
Time for a little glass of wine, perhaps?
Sure. Were you gonna do it?
Sorry, no, I have one more.
Yeah.
Just a little question. Do you plan to go back to Poland? Is there more work that you could do there, from there?
I just came back from Poland. Right, I mentioned that, right. Yes, all I know is that when I go to Poland, I'm like, oh, I have to come back to Poland. There's more shooting I would love to do there when I have the funds to. Otherwise, I don't need to. I think more just to stay connected to the story. Like, I don't need to do more research, but I just need to be there to stay connected with my community there and with the story. Because 4 years of not being there, like, it changed what I was focusing on. It became much more and more and more, like, about my present situation. But that was a very powerful thing that happened. And in order for me to be telling it, I do need to be able to be in that space and feel that space, because it's very different than being here. So hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.